seen the large number of media articles that have emerged in the past 24 hours on this very subject, and we are, of course, now analyzing the various pieces of information that have been published. So what I can announce for now is that the Commission has decided to send a letter to the former Vice President Kroes for a clarification on the information presented in the media. And this is as much as I can say at the moment.
Bruce DelValle is a constitutional law expert and the founding member of Sims and DelVoglia. He joins me from Annapolis, Maryland. Bruce, what do you make of these leaked documents? Does it show illegal behavior, or is this just simply unethical?
Thank you very much for having me on. I think it's actually both. They acknowledge, they being Uber through this Mr. McGahn, who was sort of the mastermind of their lobbying effort in Europe, they acknowledge that their template, their model was to break the law, violate the law, and then try to go get the law changed. And their documents also show that they knew that they were committing unlawful acts by participating, creating, inciting violence and blockading Berlin, various cities, Paris, Stockholm. In South Africa, they did the same thing, and at least one or two Uber drivers were murdered. So they knew they were breaking the law. In fact, that was their role model. That always struck me. Perhaps I'm a little bit older, but I was always amazed that this company just sprung from nowhere in a heavy regulated industry and purposely violated the law. Taxi drivers need licenses for good reason, so that we can trust them with our lives. And yet here were these people that were not insured, they were not licensed, they were giving people taxi rides. I anecdotally was always amazed. My mother always taught me, don't get into a car with strangers. So why possibly would you call someone late at night that you don't know, that isn't licensed, that isn't regulated, and get in the car with them and go somewhere? So they acted unethically on every level, but they also acted unlawfully. What they did was very unlawful. They knew it. That was their game plan.
Yeah, an excellent point there, too, about getting into a car with a stranger. Bruce, what about the issue of workers' rights? How did these tactics employed by Uber undermine those?
It's absolutely devastating if you look at it. The darkest chapters in labor history, from slavery to child labor, involve using workers as pawns. Using them in inhuman ways without any regard for their life, their well-being, their sense of self, or their ability to meaningfully participate and to gain something from their jobs. They saw their Uber drivers as pawns. They used them as pawns purposely because, as they said, violence is good. The more violence there is, the more likely we'll be able to move into a territory. And it worked throughout Europe. It also works here in the United States. They somehow convinced everyone of a certain age group that they were for the common man, that they were good for workers, that the gig economy that they pushed forward was good for workers. Well, now we find out it's really not. They don't treat workers like employees. They refuse to recognize them as employees, and they're not subject to the law. They don't have to abide by labor laws. And I think that's a big fraud that they've perpetrated on the United States and on Europe, but mostly on Europe. They broke the law also in how they lobbied, especially France. Macron has again shown himself to be sort of a silly dupe. If you look at his policies in Africa, he almost always gets it wrong. He seems to be susceptible to the idea that if you make him feel like he's a cool modern guy, he'll do pretty much anything you want him to do. But they are notorious for treating their workers poorly. And they seem to rejoice in it, which I find absolutely devastating from a social consciousness perspective.
All right, Bruce DelValle joining us from Annapolis, Maryland. Bruce, thank you as always.